I'm full-blooded Navajo, and so I hardly leave the reservation because most of my family is here. I have family on my mother's side that lives near Jasper National Park up in Alberta. My name is Kaya. I was born and raised on the vast Navajo reservation that stretches across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. My family has always been deeply rooted in our culture and traditions, passed down through generations. My father was a skilled silversmith who crafted intricate pieces of jewelry adorned with turquoise stones, a symbol of protection for our people. My mother, Ayana, was a talented weaver who wove vibrant rugs depicting stories of our ancestors and their spiritual journey. Growing up on the reservation, I spent my days exploring the mesas and canyons that surrounded our small community. The land held countless secrets. Ancient petroglyphs etched into red rock walls whispered stories of long-forgotten times, while the wind carried the scent of sagebrush and cedar through the air. Despite being immersed in my Navajo heritage, I had never ventured far from home until I received an invitation to visit my distant relatives in Alberta. They were part of my mother's extended family who had moved to Canada years ago in search of better opportunities. Eager to connect with my Canadian roots and experience life beyond the reservation, I packed my bags and embarked on a journey northward. After a long and tiring journey, I finally arrived at the quaint town of Hinton, nestled in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies. My relatives, Aunt Nahani and Uncle Akacheta, warmly welcomed me into their home. They lived in a cozy log cabin surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains, a stark contrast to the arid landscape I was accustomed to. Despite being miles away from my reservation, there were striking similarities between our cultures, both deeply connected to nature and spiritual beliefs. Aunt Nahani was an herbalist who used plants native to Alberta for medicinal purposes, while Uncle Akacheta was a respected elder within their community. They shared stories of their ancestors and taught me about the sacred sites scattered throughout Jasper National Park. One day, they decided to take me on a hike through the park to visit one such site known as Spirit Island. As we traversed through lush pine forests and crossed crystal-clear streams, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the pristine beauty that surrounded us. Upon reaching Spirit Island, we participated in a traditional ceremony to honor our ancestors and give thanks for the land that sustained us. It was during this ceremony that I experienced something truly extraordinary. As dusk approached and shadows began to dance across the landscape, and I felt a sudden chill in the air. The atmosphere seemed to shift, as if a veil had been lifted between our world and another. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I felt a presence nearby, something ancient and powerful. Aunt Nahani must have sensed it too because she began to chant softly in our native language, her voice steady and calm. Uncle Akacheta joined her, their voices harmonizing with the gentle rustle of leaves above us. And then I saw it, a majestic elk emerging from the shadows of the forest. Its coat shimmered like moonlight, and its eyes held an intelligence beyond that of any animal I had ever encountered. It approached us slowly, its hooves barely making a sound on the soft earth. As it drew closer, I noticed something even more remarkable about this creature. It bore markings similar to those found in ancient petroglyphs back home on the reservation. The symbols seemed to glow faintly, pulsating with an energy that was both familiar and otherworldly. Uncle Akacheta whispered that we were in the presence of a spirit guide, a being sent by our ancestors to protect and guide us through life's challenges. He instructed me to approach the elk cautiously and offer my hand in friendship. With my heart pounding in my chest, I stepped forward and extended my hand towards the magnificent creature. To my astonishment, it lowered its head gracefully and touched its nose to my palm, an acceptance of our connection. In that moment, I understood that despite being far from home and surrounded by unfamiliar landscapes, I was never truly alone. Our ancestors' spirits lived within us all, guiding us through life's journey no matter where we roamed. This spirit guide led us safely back through the darkening forest, its ethereal glow illuminating our path. As we reached the edge of the woods, it paused and looked back at us one last time before vanishing into the shadows. It was guiding us somewhere special, and as we followed its path, we came upon a hidden clearing bathed in moonlight. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the heavens. Uncle Akacheta explained that this was a sacred place where our ancestors would come to seek guidance from the spirit world. We sat beneath the tree and listened as he shared stories of our family's history, connecting us to generations long past. As I sat there under the moonlit sky, I felt a profound sense of belonging, not only to my family, but also to the land itself. This journey had shown me that despite the distance between us, our roots ran deep, intertwined with those who had walked these lands before us. Something was wrong, though. My family sensed it, and there was just something off about the air around us. Almost instantly, I began to hear what I can only describe as snarling just off in the trees, and it sounded like it was coming from a lion. I noticed my aunt and uncle became more and more tense as they warned me in hushed tones that these were the sounds of manifesting dark spirits. We quickly gathered our belongings and prepared to leave the sacred clearing. Uncle Akacheta led us in a protective prayer, asking our ancestors to shield us from any malevolent forces that may be lurking nearby. With our hearts pounding, we made our way back through the forest, staying close together and keeping a watchful eye on our surroundings. The snarling grew louder and more menacing as we continued our journey, echoing through the trees like a sinister warning. It was clear that whatever was stalking us did not want us to leave its territory unscathed. As we neared the edge of the woods, I felt a sudden gust of wind whip through the trees, carrying with it an icy chill that seemed to penetrate my very bones. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I realized that we were no longer alone. Something had followed us out of the shadows. Without warning, a massive wolf-like creature burst forth from the underbrush, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. Its fur was matted and dark, and its teeth bared in a ferocious snarl. Uncle Akacheta shouted for us to run while he bravely faced off against the beast. Aunt Nahani grabbed my hand and pulled me along as we sprinted towards their cabin, praying that we would make it there before this terrifying creature could catch up to us. We burst through the door of their home just as we heard Uncle Akacheta's war cry echo through the night air. We knew he had given his all to protect us from this malevolent spirit. With tears streaming down her face, Aunt Nahani began another prayer, this time calling upon our ancestors to aid her brother in his battle against darkness. As she chanted, I joined her in beseeching those who had come before us for help. And then, silence fell over the forest. Moments later, Uncle Akacheta appeared at the door, his clothes torn and bloodied, but his spirit unbroken. The creature had been vanquished, driven back into the shadows by the combined strength of our ancestors and our unwavering faith in their guidance. My uncle informed me that these were demonic spirits who were able to fully physically manifest into hideous beings. They do not like us going into their territory, and there has been a war between them and our people for many years. From that day forward, I understood that no matter where life took me or what challenges I faced, I would always carry the strength of my ancestors within me. They were an ever-present force in my life, guiding and protecting me from harm. As I grew older, I made it my mission to share the stories and traditions of our people with others, both on and off the reservation. My experiences in Jasper National Park had taught me that our connections to one another and to the land were far more powerful than any physical distance could ever be. In time, I became a respected storyteller within my community, weaving tales of courage, wisdom, and spiritual connection for all who would listen. And every so often, when the moon was full and the air was thick with mystery, I would venture back into those ancient forests, seeking out sacred spaces where I could commune with the spirits of my ancestors. For there is no greater truth than this. We are never truly alone. We are all part of a vast tapestry that stretches across generations, bound together by love, tradition, and an unbreakable bond to the land that has sustained us for millennia. In the small town of Eldritch Falls, nestled in the crook of a forgotten valley deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains, an ancient legend persisted. For generations, it had been passed down from parent to child as a warning, a story meant to keep children from venturing too far into the dense forest that surrounded their homes. The legend spoke of creatures that lurked in the shadows, stalking and hunting those who dared trespass into their domain. In recent years, many had dismissed the tales as mere superstition or folklore, stories spun by overactive imaginations and fueled by isolation. But there were still those who believed, who felt a shiver run down their spines when they walked alone at night or caught sight of something just beyond the edge of their vision. Among these believers was me, Annie Winters, a woman with an uncanny ability to sense things others could not. A transplant from the bustling city of Reno, I had come to Eldritch Falls seeking solace and escape from the chaos of urban life. My fascination with the paranormal and unexplained had led me to this remote corner of the world, where I hoped to uncover the truth behind the legend. Upon arriving in Eldritch Falls, I found myself captivated by its eerie beauty. The town was small, consisting of little more than a main street lined with aging buildings that seemed to sag beneath the weight of their own history. Beyond the town's borders lay miles upon miles of untouched wilderness, a tangled web of trees and undergrowth that seemed to swallow up everything in its path. It wasn't long before I began hearing whispers from the townsfolk about strange occurrences taking place within those woods. Hikers would venture out into the forest, only to return with tales of unexplainable noises echoing through the trees, or sightings of shadowy figures darting between trunks. Some spoke in hushed tones about a feeling they couldn't quite describe, a sensation akin to being watched by unseen eyes. Driven by curiosity and an insatiable desire for answers, I set out to explore the forest for myself. Accompanied only by my faithful dog Otis, we delved deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness that enveloped us. As we ventured further from civilization, I felt an unmistakable sense of unease settle over me like a shroud. The air grew heavy with tension, as if charged with some unseen energy. Otis seemed to sense it too. His ears perked up, and his hackles raised as he scanned our surroundings warily. It was then that I first heard it, a faint knocking sound emanating from somewhere deep within the woods. 3 distinct knocks echoed through the stillness, followed by an oppressive silence that seemed to smother all other sounds. Intrigued yet wary, I continued onward, drawn inexorably toward whatever force was responsible for these strange phenomena. The knocking persisted as we pressed on, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. As night began to fall, I stumbled upon a clearing in the forest where the air seemed to crackle with an otherworldly energy. We decided to sit for a moment to catch our breath. It was here, beneath the watchful gaze of ancient trees that stretched their gnarled limbs toward the heavens, that I felt it, a presence unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The air seemed to hum with an electric charge, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, as if in response to some unseen force. Otis began to growl low in his throat, his eyes fixed on a point just beyond the edge of the clearing. I followed his gaze and saw it, a figure shrouded in darkness, its form indistinct and constantly shifting as if composed of shadows themselves. As I stared at the figure, it seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a ghostly apparition caught between worlds. The air around it seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy, as if reality itself was bending and warping in its presence. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, sending leaves spiraling through the air and causing the trees to groan and creak as they swayed. The figure appeared to be drawn toward me by some invisible force, its movements fluid and unnerving like smoke coiling through the darkness. I felt my heart hammering in my chest as fear threatened to consume me. I knew instinctively that this entity was not something I could fight or reason with. It was a being born of darkness and malice, a predator that had stalked these woods for centuries, feasting on the fear of those who dared trespass into its territory. But I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. I was captivated by its otherworldly aura, compelled to try and understand what manner of creature could inspire such terror in those who encountered it. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. Eyes that burned like embers within a face devoid of any discernible features. Limbs that seemed impossibly long and twisted. A mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth that glistened wetly in the moonlight. The figure stopped just beyond the edge of the clearing, seemingly held at bay by some unseen barrier. It tilted its head ever so slightly, regarding me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl, each second stretching out into an eternity as we stared at one another across the void separating our two worlds. It was then that I realized this creature, this nightmare given form, was not simply content with stalking its prey from afar. No, it sought something far more insidious, to instill a sense of dread and unease so profound that it would burrow deep into the very core of its victims, leaving them forever haunted by the memory of their encounter. As this realization struck me, I felt a surge of defiance well up within me. I refused to be cowed by this monster, to allow it to feed on my fear and terror. And so, with every ounce of courage I could muster, I took a step toward the creature, my eyes locked on its own. The figure seemed taken aback by my actions, as if unaccustomed to such resistance. It hesitated for a moment before letting out an unearthly shriek that echoed through the forest like the howl of some tortured soul. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, dissipating into shadows that melted away into the darkness. In the wake of our encounter, I found myself trembling from head to toe. Whether from fear or adrenaline, I couldn't say. But one thing was certain. Whatever malevolent force lurked within these woods had not been vanquished. It remained ever present, watching and waiting for its next opportunity to strike. For weeks afterward, I found myself unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me through the winding streets of Eldritch Falls and lurking in the shadows just beyond my field of vision. The legend had become more than just a story. It had seeped into every aspect of my life like an insidious poison. In the days and weeks that followed my encounter with the entity, I began to notice a series of strange occurrences. It started with subtle things, objects in my home being moved or misplaced, whispers in the night that seemed to come from nowhere, an ever-present feeling of being watched. But as time went on, these incidents grew more frequent and more intense. The whispers became voices, taunting me with cryptic messages and sinister laughter. Shadows danced across my walls at night, taking on twisted forms that resembled the creature I had encountered in the forest. It was clear to me that this malevolent force had marked me, singling me out for some unknown purpose. And it wasn't just my life it sought to infiltrate. It began affecting those around me as well. Friends and neighbors reported having unsettling dreams filled with dark figures and feelings of dread. Even Charlie, once a fearless companion, now cowered at every unexplained sound or flicker of movement. My home was nearly becoming possessed by an evil energy. I had invited my sister over, who lived up north in Pennsylvania, to come and rid the spirits of my home. She was a practicing witch and brought with her a Ouija board to drive the spirits out. As my sister Lydia set up the Ouija board in the center of my living room, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and hope. Could this ancient instrument really provide us with answers, or a means to banish the entity that had attached itself to me? With Charlie nervously watching from a corner, Lydia lit candles around the room and began chanting incantations meant to protect us from any malevolent forces that might be present. She then instructed me to place my fingers on the planchette alongside hers. As we began our session, I could feel an oppressive energy hanging in the air, as if something was watching us intently, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The planchette remained still for several long moments before suddenly jerking into motion beneath our fingertips. It spelled out a message. "I am bound." Lydia's eyes widened as she realized what this could mean. It seemed that by confronting the creature in the forest, I had inadvertently formed a connection with it, one that allowed it to infiltrate not only my life, but also those around me. We needed to find a way to break this bond and send the entity back where it belonged. With renewed determination, Lydia guided me through a series of rituals designed to sever our connection with the malevolent force and banish it from our lives forever. As we completed each ritual, I could feel the oppressive energy in my home begin to dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace and calm that had been absent for far too long. The shadows no longer danced across my walls at night. Charlie returned to his brave and loyal self, and even my friends and neighbors reported feeling lighter and more at ease. Though we had seemingly succeeded in driving away the dark presence that had plagued Eldritch Falls, I knew deep down that such forces were never truly vanquished. They simply lay dormant, biding their time and waiting for the right moment to return. After that incident, things escalated very quickly, to a very violent level. I'm not comfortable going into every detail because of how traumatic it was for me, and how I had entities that forced themselves on me at night. It got so bad I began having vivid hallucinations and started cutting. After 2 months of this going on, my dog passed away in his sleep. His heart just stopped beating. My life was spiraling and I felt like I had to leave. In the wake of Charlie's sudden passing, I was utterly devastated. The loss of my loyal companion, coupled with the unrelenting torment inflicted upon me by these malevolent entities, had left me broken and on the verge of collapse. I knew that I couldn't continue living this way. Something had to change. Desperate for relief from my suffering, I made the difficult decision to leave Eldritch Falls behind in search of a fresh start. I packed up my belongings and said my goodbyes to friends and neighbors who had become like family to me during my time in town. With a heavy heart, I set off on a journey to find sanctuary from the darkness that seemed intent on consuming me. As I traveled from place to place, seeking solace and safety, it became apparent that the connection between myself and these malevolent forces had not been completely severed. No matter where I went or how far I ran, they were always there, lurking just beyond the edge of my perception, waiting for an opportunity to strike. It was during this time that I discovered a hidden talent within myself, an ability to channel my pain and fear into something more powerful than any force these entities could muster against me. Through self-discovery and intense study of various spiritual practices, I began harnessing this newfound power as a means of protecting myself from their relentless attacks. Gradually, as I grew stronger and more adept at wielding this energy, the violent episodes subsided. The vivid hallucinations and feelings of despair that had once plagued me began to fade, replaced by a sense of determination and resilience. I knew that I would never be completely free from the darkness that haunted me, but I refused to let it control my life any longer. As time went on, I found solace in helping others who were struggling with similar experiences. Through sharing my story and offering guidance to those facing their own battles against malevolent forces, I discovered a renewed sense of purpose and a reason to keep fighting. My journey eventually led me back to Reno, where I opened a small shop specializing in spiritual healing and protection. There, surrounded by crystals, talismans, and other tools for warding off negative energies, I finally found the peace I had been searching for. Though the scars left behind by my experiences in Eldritch Falls would always remain, both physical and emotional, they served as a constant reminder of how far I had come and the strength that lay within me. No longer tormented by the darkness that had once threatened to consume me, I dedicated my life to helping others find their own light amidst the shadows. And while there was no way of knowing what challenges lay ahead, or if the entities from Eldritch Falls would ever return, one thing was certain: whatever may come my way, I was ready to face it head-on with courage and determination. In memory of Charlie, my brave companion who stood by my side through it all, his spirit lived on within me as a testament to our unbreakable bond. Together, we had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger than ever before, a living testament to the power of love and loyalty in overcoming even the darkest of adversities. I was about 12 years old when my family moved to a small town in North Dakota. We had a decent-sized property surrounded by dense woods, and my father was an avid hunter. He taught me everything he knew about hunting, and we would often spend weekends out in the woods together. Growing up in the bustling city of Chicago, I never thought I'd end up living in a small town in North Dakota. My father had grown up in the countryside and always dreamed of going back to his roots. When he received a job offer that allowed him to work remotely, he decided it was time for our family to leave the urban jungle behind. As we settled into our new life, my father began sharing stories from his childhood with me. He would tell me about hunting trips with his own father and the lessons they learned together out in the wilderness. He spoke fondly of these memories and wanted to pass on this tradition to me. The woods surrounding our property were filled with deer, elk, and other game animals. My father wasted no time teaching me how to track them, how to use a rifle safely, and most importantly, how to respect nature and its inhabitants. Over time, I became quite skilled at hunting. Our weekends were spent exploring the dense woods together, tracking animals, setting up blinds, and waiting patiently for hours until we had an opportunity for a clean shot. One particular weekend stands out in my memory more than any other. It was early November, just after my 13th birthday, when my father suggested we head out for an overnight hunting trip deeper into the forest than we'd ever gone before. Excited by this new adventure, we packed our gear and set off early Saturday morning. The air was crisp as we trekked further into the woods, fallen leaves crunching beneath our boots as sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. By late afternoon, we reached a secluded clearing where we decided to set up camp for the night. As darkness fell upon us, we decided to retire early for the next day's adventure. As dawn broke, we awoke to the sound of birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves. After a quick breakfast, we set out deeper into the woods, armed with our rifles and binoculars. My father led the way as I eagerly followed, excited for what lay ahead. Hours passed as we tracked signs of deer through the forest, broken branches, hoof prints, and droppings leading us further from camp. We finally spotted a small herd grazing in a sunlit clearing up ahead. My father signaled for me to stop and take cover behind a fallen tree while he positioned himself nearby. We watched patiently as the deer continued grazing, waiting for an opportunity to take a clean shot. As I focused on my breathing and steadied my aim, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A few yards away from the herd was another deer standing alone near the edge of the woods. Its fur was an unnaturally pale shade of grayish-brown, and its body seemed emaciated, ribs visible beneath its thinning coat. As I turned my attention towards this unusual creature, it suddenly raised its head and looked directly at me with dark, empty eyes that shook my very soul. In that moment, everything around me seemed to fall silent. Even the sounds of nature appeared to have ceased entirely. I glanced over at my father, who had also noticed this eerie presence, his face etched with concern and confusion. Before either of us could react further, the strange deer abruptly dropped onto its front legs and began crawling unnervingly fast towards us. My heart raced as panic gripped me tightly, instinctively knowing that whatever this creature was, it wasn't natural or safe to be around. Without hesitation, or waiting for my father's instruction, I fired off a shot in its direction. The deafening sound echoed through the now eerily quiet forest as both herds scattered, including the strange creature that retreated back into the shadows of the trees. My father and I exchanged worried glances, silently agreeing to abandon our hunt and head back to camp immediately. As we hastily packed up our gear, the eerie silence persisted. No birdsong or rustling leaves accompanied us on our trek back home. It was as if the entire forest had been cast under a dark spell in response to our encounter with that otherworldly creature. The thing was following us through the trees. We could feel its presence, and occasionally caught glimpses of its pale form darting between the shadows. As we quickened our pace, an unsettling feeling of being watched weighed heavily upon us. The forest remained unnaturally silent, amplifying the sound of our own breaths and footsteps. As we neared our campsite, my father suddenly stopped in his tracks. I followed his gaze to see that our once neatly organized camp had been completely ransacked. Our tent torn apart, supplies scattered across the ground, and food remnants strewn about. The realization that this creature had not only tracked us but also destroyed our camp sent a shiver down my spine. My father looked at me with determination in his eyes and said, "We need to get out of here now." With no time to salvage anything from the wreckage, we hastily made our way back towards home, the oppressive silence persisting around us as we moved through the woods. Every so often, we would hear faint whispers echoing through the trees, or catch sight of movement just beyond our peripheral vision. Finally reaching the edge of the woods and stepping onto our property felt like crossing a threshold into safety. Yet neither of us could shake off the unease that lingered within us. The noises behind us still persisted greatly. We rushed into our house, locking the doors and windows behind us. As we caught our breath in the safety of our home, my father and I exchanged fearful glances, acknowledging that what we had experienced was beyond anything either of us could comprehend. That night, sleep eluded both of us as we lay awake listening to every creak and groan the old house made, half expecting to see that unnatural creature appear at any moment. The following day, my father contacted a local hunter he knew well and shared our experience with him. To our surprise, the man listened intently without any hint of disbelief. As it turned out, this would have caused a string of encounters within the next coming years. He revealed that several other hunters in the area had reported similar experiences with a pale, emaciated, deer-like creature over the years. Some even claimed to have heard strange whispers and noises in the woods, much like what we had experienced. The locals began referring to this mysterious being as the shapeshifter, believing it to be a malevolent force haunting the forest. As the months went by, my father and I couldn't shake off the memories of our encounter with the shapeshifter. Despite our fears, life continued as usual, until strange occurrences began happening around our home. It started subtly. Objects would be moved or misplaced when we were certain they had been left in a specific spot. We brushed it off as forgetfulness at first, but then more unsettling incidents took place. Late at night, we would hear faint tapping on the windows or saw footsteps circling our house. Each time we mustered up the courage to investigate, there would be no sign of anyone or anything outside. As these disturbances increased in frequency and intensity, so did our unease. The once warm and welcoming atmosphere of our home was now tainted with a sense of dread that seemed to linger in every corner. One evening, while my father was working late in his office, I heard what sounded like whispers coming from just outside my bedroom window. My heart raced as I hesitantly approached the window and peered out into the darkness. There, standing near the edge of the woods with its hollow eyes staring directly at me, was the shapeshifter. Terrified, I ran to my father's office and frantically told him what I had seen. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and rushed outside to confront whatever it was that had been tormenting us for months. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity as I waited anxiously for my father's return. When he finally came back inside, he looked pale and shaken, but assured me that he hadn't found anything lurking near our property. From that night on, we took extra precautions to secure our home, installing motion sensor lights around the perimeter, and even adopting a large German shepherd named Max to serve as both companion and protector. Over time, the strange activity around our home gradually subsided, but never completely disappeared. In fact, within months of getting Max, he mysteriously vanished one day. I could have sworn I heard him yelping and whimpering in the woods one night, but when I went to investigate, I found nothing. Not even a week after that, I found his collar covered in blood and shredded up near the edge of our property line. The thought of what happened to him didn't sit well with me. The loss of Max weighed heavily on our family, and the strange occurrences around our home continued to escalate. It seemed as though whatever malevolent force we had encountered in the woods was growing bolder, no longer content with simply watching from a distance. My father's health began to decline rapidly. He developed high fevers, suffered from severe fatigue, and complained of constant headaches. Doctors were baffled by his condition and could find no explanation for his sudden illness. As my father grew weaker, I took it upon myself to watch over our property and investigate any odd noises or disturbances during the night. Despite my best efforts, I never caught sight of the shapeshifter again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was always lurking just out of view, taunting us with its unseen presence. One evening, while my mother tended to my bedridden father, I decided to venture deeper into the woods to try and find a trace of Max in search of answers. The sun was setting as I cautiously made my way through the now familiar forest paths, armed with only a flashlight and a hunting knife for protection. The air felt heavy with tension as darkness enveloped me. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. As I reached the spot where we had first encountered the shapeshifter months earlier, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, as if some primal instinct was warning me that I was not alone. I don't think I made it more than 300 yards in the woods before I blacked out completely. I feel like I had been ran over by a truck, and strange sores began to pop up all over my body. Things began to get really bad after this. My father had to be hospitalized, and my mother was growing increasingly worried about both our health and safety. The doctors were still unable to determine the cause of my father's illness, and now they were equally baffled by my sudden blackout and the appearance of these mysterious sores. As weeks went by, our once happy home had become a place filled with fear and uncertainty. My father's condition continued to worsen in the hospital, while I struggled with constant fatigue and pain from the unexplained sores. Desperate for answers and determined to protect our family, my mother began researching local folklore and legends, hoping to find some clue as to what could be plaguing us. Her search led her to an old Native American shaman who lived on the outskirts of town. After hearing our story, he spoke gravely about an ancient evil that dwelled within the woods, a malevolent spirit capable of taking many forms and feeding off the fear and suffering it inflicted upon its victims. The shaman agreed to perform a cleansing ritual on our home in an attempt to banish this dark presence. He burned sage throughout the house, reciting prayers in his native language as he moved from room to room. As he finished the ritual, he left us with a protective amulet made from sacred stones and herbs, instructing us to keep it near at all times. In the days that followed, we noticed a gradual shift in atmosphere around our home. The oppressive dread that had once hung over us seemed to lift slightly. Even my father's health showed signs of improvement, but we knew better than to let our guard down completely. Whatever evil lurked within those woods remained ever present in our minds. We actually moved about 4 hours away after that. A whole new town and everything. Never had another problem after that. It felt like it was nearly instant, where everything seemed to go back to normal. As we settled into our new home and town, the memories of our terrifying experiences in North Dakota began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of security and hope. My father's health continued to improve, eventually allowing him to return to work and resume his role as a loving husband and devoted father. The protective amulet given to us by the shaman remained with us always, serving as both a reminder of what we had endured and a symbol of the strength we found within ourselves to overcome it. While my father never took up hunting again, he would often share stories from his youth, this time focusing on the beauty of nature and the importance of respecting its power. As for me, I couldn't help but feel forever changed by those harrowing events. Though I no longer feared the unknown lurking within the shadows, I had gained a profound respect for the mysteries that lay hidden just beyond our understanding. Years have passed since our encounter with the Skinwalker, or what I believe to be one. Either that, or a Wendigo spirit. Either way, I fear and respect what is in the woods now. I suggest you do the same. I wanted to tell you about my childhood. Around the age of 13, my family and I moved to a small, isolated town nestled in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. The town was called Clearwater, and it was a place where everyone knew each other's names, where secrets were difficult to keep, and where the vast expanse of nature surrounded us on all sides. My father was a respected psychologist who had been offered a position at the local clinic. He saw this as an opportunity for our family to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with our roots. The first few months in Clearwater were an adjustment period for all of us. My mother found solace in tending to her garden, while my sister Emily immersed herself in books about botany and ecology. I spent most of my time exploring the woods behind our house. It was during these solitary expeditions that I discovered something remarkable. One day, while walking along a winding trail that led deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an ancient grove filled with trees that seemed impossibly old. Their gnarled branches twisted towards the sky like arthritic fingers reaching out for something just beyond their grasp. The air within this hidden sanctuary felt charged with energy, as if some unseen force permeated every inch of space between those ancient trunks. It was here that I first encountered what would become known as the spirit of Clearwater. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a curious amalgamation of flora and fauna, vines twisting around tree limbs like serpents constricting their prey, moss-covered stones arranged in intricate patterns across the forest floor, leaves rustling gently despite there being no discernible wind. But as I continued to explore this enchanted grove, I began to notice certain anomalies that could not be easily explained away by natural phenomena alone. For instance, whenever I approached one particular cluster of trees near the center of the grove, I would experience an overwhelming sense of dread, as if some malevolent presence was lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. Over time, I became convinced that this mysterious force was not only sentient, but also capable of communicating with me on some level. We started to have this otherworldly bond, if you could call it that, like it would channel information and thoughts through me. I decided to keep a journal of my experiences in the grove, meticulously documenting each encounter with this enigmatic presence. I would spend hours sitting beneath those ancient trees, attempting to decipher the subtle language of rustling leaves and creaking branches. It was during one such session that I experienced a breakthrough. As I sat there, deep in thought, I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to speak aloud, as if compelled by some force beyond my control. In that moment, my voice became a conduit for the spirit's message, a torrent of wisdom and insight pouring forth from some hidden wellspring within me. As the words tumbled out, I began to understand that this spirit was not malevolent, but rather an embodiment of nature itself, an elemental force that sought balance and harmony within the world. It had chosen me as its emissary, granting me access to its vast reservoir of knowledge in exchange for my help in restoring equilibrium to Clearwater. I shared these revelations with my father, who, despite his initial skepticism, soon became fascinated by my accounts of the spirit's teachings. He recognized their potential value within his own field of study, and encouraged me to continue exploring this strange connection between myself and the natural world. Over time, our collaboration evolved into something much greater than either of us could have anticipated. Together, we developed a new psychological framework based on the principles of balance and interconnections espoused by the spirit of Clearwater. This groundbreaking work had the potential to reshape our understanding of human consciousness and pave the way for a more harmonious relationship between mankind and nature. As for myself, I continued to serve as a conduit for the spirit's wisdom throughout my life, using its teachings to guide not only my own personal growth. I believed that a lone spirit wandered the wilderness there for years, and had somehow used me to be a conduit. We moved away when I was 17, just 4 years later. So, there I was, sitting down with my buddies at our favorite local bar after a long day of work. The atmosphere was lively and the conversations were flowing. You know how it is when you get together with your friends? One story leads to another, and before you know it, you're deep into some wild tales. That night, we started talking about strange encounters we've had in our lives. You know, those unexplainable experiences that just stick with you for years. And that's when I remembered this crazy thing that happened to me when I was a kid. I grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California, on this huge 80-acre plot of land that belonged to my family. It was an amazing place to grow up, surrounded by nature, endless woods to explore, and just enough isolation to let your imagination run wild. One summer afternoon, when I was around 10 or 11 years old, I decided to venture out into the lower pasture with my little brother and his friend, who were both around 7 or 8 at the time. We were just doing what kids do, running around, playing games, and having a blast. For some reason that day, I felt compelled to travel deeper into the woods, as if something was calling out to me. I convinced my brother and his friend to follow me, and we made our way through the dense foliage, stepping over roots and pushing branches aside. As we continued deeper into the forest, there was a deep sense of anticipation in the air. It felt like we were on the verge of discovering something extraordinary. The sunlight filtered through the trees above us, casting dappled shadows on the ground that seemed to dance with each step we took. We eventually arrived at a small creek, the sound of water trickling over rocks providing a soothing backdrop to our adventure. We decided this would be the perfect spot to build a fort, our secret hideout in the heart of the woods. As we gathered sticks and branches for our makeshift structure, we couldn't help but notice an overwhelming stench that seemed to come and go on the breeze. It was like rotting meat, mixed with an earthy dampness, absolutely nauseating. We tried to ignore it, attributing it to some dead animal nearby, or maybe even just the natural decay of the forest floor. But as much as we wanted to shake off that smell, there was something about it that made us feel uneasy. It was almost as if it wasn't just a scent, but also a presence lurking around us. Despite our growing discomfort, we continued building our fort, determined not to let anything ruin our fun. However, as we were putting the finishing touches on our creation, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Just inside the woodline stood a figure, a man with the head of a stag. The dark fur covering his face and neck abruptly stopped at his collarbone, revealing white skin beneath. His enormous antlers resembled tree roots that had been ripped from the ground during a storm. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. His chest was muscular yet athletic, adorned with what looked like stripes painted in dark colors. These long marks ran down his arms and across his torso from front to back. His legs were either covered in the same dark fur or clothed in dark pants. I couldn't quite make out which. The three of us stared at this creature in disbelief, unable to move or speak. It didn't seem aggressive, but rather neutral in temperament, simply observing us with curiosity. As quickly as it appeared, it vanished into the shadows of the forest without making a sound. We stood there, still frozen in shock, before finally snapping out of it and sprinting back to the safety of our home. To this day, my brother and his friends swear they saw the same creature that I did. We've never been able to find any explanation for what we encountered that day. Was it a skinwalker? My brother believes it was a guardian of the forest that we saw that day. What's your opinion? I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a warm evening in Texas, and I had just finished my radio show. Ironically, it's about the paranormal. As I walked out of the studio with my trusted sidekick and producer Roger, we were both feeling a sense of accomplishment from yet another successful broadcast. As we stepped outside into the balmy evening air, I couldn't help but notice how bright the moon was that night. It cast an eerie glow on everything around us, casting shadows that seemed to dance in tune with the rustling leaves of nearby trees. Roger and I were walking towards our cars when suddenly we saw something strange approaching from down the street. It looked like a dog at first glance, but there was something off about it. Its gait seemed unnatural and almost human-like. I squinted my eyes to get a better look at this bizarre creature as it moved closer. To my astonishment, it appeared to be a large black dog with powerful muscles rippling beneath its short fur. Its ears were pointed upwards, giving it an aggressive appearance that sent shivers down my spine. "What in tarnation is that thing?" Roger exclaimed as he too caught sight of the creature. He had seen his fair share of odd things during our many years working together, but this was something else entirely. As if sensing our unease, the dog stopped dead in its tracks and stared directly at us with piercing yellow eyes. The air around us seemed to grow heavy with dread as we stood frozen in place by its unblinking gaze. In an attempt to lighten the mood, I jokingly said, "Heck, Roger, that looks like one of them skinwalkers we've been talking about on the show." But even as I laughed nervously at my own joke, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there might be some truth to what I had just said. Suddenly, the dog's jaw opened wide as if it was about to bark, but instead of a growl or a howl, we heard a clear, high-pitched voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Come here!" The creature then turned and bolted down the street with incredible speed. We watched in awe as it moved with an unnatural gait, crossing its paws and almost appearing to walk on two legs, before disappearing around a corner. Feeling shaken by what we had just witnessed, Roger and I hurriedly got into our cars and drove home. As I sped down the dark highway trying to drown out my thoughts with loud music, I couldn't help but feel like something was still watching me. Whispers seemed to emanate from the back seat of my car, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. My heart raced as I recalled tales of skinwalkers being able to mimic human voices and infiltrate people's lives. As if things weren't strange enough already, I noticed something odd on the side of the road, an antique clawfoot bathtub sitting alone in a field where it had no business being. The sight only added to my growing unease. And then came the final straw. Up ahead on the road, I saw what appeared to be a buck leaping out in front of my car. Slamming on the brakes, I braced for impact, only for it to reveal itself as nothing more than a bush swaying gently in the breeze. Was this all just paranoia brought on by discussing supernatural creatures on my show? Or had Roger and I truly encountered a skinwalker that night? In 2017, I spent around 4 months traveling the United States with a group of close friends, exploring the hidden corners and less traveled roads that crisscrossed the vast country. We were young, adventurous, and eager to see all that America had to offer. Our journey began in Boston, Massachusetts, and from there we traveled westward towards California. It was during this trip that I first heard about the legend of the Wendigo from my friend Jacob, who hailed from a small town in Wisconsin. He had grown up hearing stories of these malevolent creatures that roamed the wilds of North America, preying on lost souls who ventured too far into their territory. These tales intrigued me greatly. I had always been fascinated by folklore and mythology. We spent many nights gathered around campfires under starlit skies, as Jacob recounted tales of encounters with Wendigos. He spoke in hushed tones about how they could mimic human voices and transform into any shape they desired to deceive their prey before consuming them whole. As we continued our journey across the country, we decided to make a detour through Nevada on our way back east after reaching California. Our plan was to visit Reno for a few days before continuing onward towards Virginia. The night we found ourselves on Interstate 80 near Winnemucca is one I will never forget. The darkness seemed to envelop us like a shroud as we drove along the desolate highway at 3 a.m. It was bitterly cold outside, so cold that it felt as if even our breaths might freeze solid upon contact with the air. That's when we saw him, a lone figure walking along the side of the road carrying a large duffel bag. His clothing was ill-suited for such frigid temperatures, just light layers that offered little protection against the biting cold. We all felt a strange unease at the sight of this man, as if something about his presence was inherently wrong. Despite our apprehension, we couldn't ignore someone in need, so we pulled over and rolled down the window to offer assistance. The man's face was gaunt and hollow, his eyes reflecting a deep-rooted weariness that seemed out of place for someone who appeared to be in his early 30s. He told us he had been walking for hours after his car broke down further up the road, and he needed a ride into town. Jacob hesitated, clearly recalling the Wendigo stories he had shared with us during our travels. But ultimately, our sense of empathy won out over our fears, and we agreed to give him a lift. As we continued driving along I-80, we noticed an abandoned car about 20 miles from where we picked up the mysterious stranger. It was nestled among some bushes just off the road, no license plate, no signs of damage or struggle. Just like the man himself, there was something eerie about this vehicle that sent shivers down our spines. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were somehow entangled in one of Jacob's Wendigo tales come to life. When we arrived in Winnemucca, we dropped off our passenger at a local motel without incident and went on our way. Over dinner that night, Jacob regaled us with more stories about Wendigos and their connection to Native American folklore. As it turned out, many tribes believed that certain areas were cursed by these creatures, places where people would vanish without a trace or suffer terrible fates if they dared to trespass. Our curiosity piqued by these tales and spurred on by what we had experienced earlier that day. We decided to do some research on missing persons cases in the area surrounding Winnemucca. What we discovered was chilling. There were several unsolved cases dating back years, all with eerily similar circumstances. Each victim's car had been found abandoned on the side of the road, seemingly undamaged and without any sign of a struggle. The man we had picked up earlier matched the description of one such missing person from 2011. We couldn't help but wonder if our encounter with him had been an ill-fated brush with a Wendigo in disguise. As our journey continued eastward towards Virginia, the haunting events near Winnemucca remained etched into our memories. While we never encountered anything else quite so inexplicable during our travels, that night left us with a newfound respect for the legends and lore that shape our world. In time, we would come to understand that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not those that lurk in the shadows or beneath our beds, but rather those that walk among us, hidden in plain sight and wearing familiar faces. And that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to smack that like and subscribe button for more creepy stories from yours truly. Take care.